Imagine a queen on the verge of losing everything. Her throne stolen. Her army scattered. Her city controlled by her enemies. She is 21 years old, alone in the desert, with nothing but her wits and a burning, desperate ambition. The most powerful man in the world has just arrived in her capital, and he is her only hope. But between her and him stands a hostile army, blockades on every road and guards at every gate. To reach him she would have to perform the impossible. So she did not try to walk through the gates. She had herself rolled up inside a carpet. A priceless, human secret, smuggled past her enemies and delivered as a gift. When the bundle was unrolled at the feet of the Roman general Julius Caesar, out tumbled the young queen, not a supplicant but a force of nature. This was not an act of desperation. It was the first move in a game of supreme confidence. This was Cleopatra. And this is where our story truly begins, with a gamble so audacious it would change the course of history. But to understand the sheer scale of that gamble, we must rewind just a little, to the gilded cage she was born into. She was Cleopatra VII of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Greek kings who ruled Egypt from a city of dazzling white marble and savage politics, Alexandria. Her family was less a family and more a nest of vipers, famous for murdering one another over the throne. They were also puppets, their strings pulled by the burgeoning superpower of Rome. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was a weak man who paid immense bribes to Roman senators just to keep his crown. Cleopatra grew up watching this humiliation, learning a vital lesson. To survive, you must either be more ruthless than your rivals or more clever. She chose to be both. She was a prodigy. While her predecessors barely spoke the language of the people they ruled, Cleopatra mastered Egyptian, along with 8 other languages. She devoured philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and politics. She was not being groomed to be a ceremonial figurehead. She was being forged into a weapon. When her father died and she was forced to marry her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII, as tradition demanded, she refused to be a passive queen. For 3 years she ruled alone, her face on the coins, her will shaping policy. But her brother's regents, a cabal of powerful men, would not tolerate a woman who thought for herself. They orchestrated a coup, driving her from power, erasing her name from monuments, and leaving her exiled in the Syrian desert, raising a mercenary army with the last of her gold. It seemed the story of the brilliant queen was over before it had truly begun. But history had other plans. The colossal engine of Rome's civil war was about to crash into Egypt's petty squabbles. The rivalry between the generals Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great had shattered the Republic. After a devastating defeat, Pompey fled to Egypt, expecting sanctuary from his former allies. Instead, on the orders of the boy king Ptolemy XI's regents, he was murdered on a beach, his head severed as a political gift for the victorious Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria and was presented with the grisly trophy, he was not pleased, he was disgusted. This act of treacherous cowardice gave him the pretext he needed to enter the royal palace and the Egyptian civil war, declaring himself the arbiter between the feuding siblings. And it was this single brutal act that set the stage for Cleopatra's legendary gamble. Her enemy had just handed her a chance. The most powerful man in the world was in her palace, and he was already predisposed to dislike the men who now controlled her brother. All she had to do was get to him. And so, the carpet, the unrolling, the meeting of eyes. In that moment, the exiled queen and the Roman dictator sized each other up. He saw not a helpless girl, but a breathtakingly bold and intelligent woman. She saw not just a protector but the key to a kingdom. That night, they became lovers, and a partnership was born that would send shockwaves through the ancient world. What followed was a desperate, chaotic siege within the city of Alexandria. Caesar and Cleopatra, trapped together in the palace district, fought for their lives against the armies of her brother. The city burned, including a part of the legendary Great Library. But Caesar's military genius prevailed. Ptolemy XIII, attempting to flee, drowned in the Nile, weighed down by his golden armor. Victorious, Caesar placed Cleopatra back on the throne, though he forced her into another political marriage with her youngest brother, Ptolemy XIV. It was a hollow formality. The power was hers. And she was pregnant with Caesar's child. The birth of her son, Ptolemy XV Caesar, whom the people nicknamed Caesarean, Little Caesar, was a masterstroke. She now had a direct bloodline to the most powerful man in Rome, an heir who was both a Ptolemy and a Caesar. To cement this audacious claim, she later traveled to Rome itself, living as Caesar's guest in a villa across the Tiber. Her presence was a sensation and a scandal. The Romans were deeply suspicious of this sophisticated, intelligent queen from the East. When Caesar placed a golden statue of her in the temple of his divine ancestor, Venus, the Senate simmered with rage. She was seen as the embodiment of his kingly ambitions, a threat to the republic itself. And on the Ides of March in 44 BC, the daggers of the senators proved just how deep that fear ran. Julius Caesar was dead, murdered on the floor of the Senate. Cleopatra's world imploded. Her protector, the father of her son, was gone. The political alliance she had so carefully built was shattered. She fled Rome, a widow in all but name, and returned to an Egypt on the brink of famine. Shortly after her return, her young husband-brother, Ptolemy XIV, died suddenly. Poison was the whispered cause. Cleopatra now elevated her 3-year-old son, Caesarion, as her co-ruler. She was securing her dynasty, eliminating any obstacle to her sons, and therefore her own rule. But the shadow of Rome had not receded, it had merely changed shape. The assassins of Caesar were defeated by a new alliance. The second triumvirate, composed of Caesar's heir, the cold and calculating Octavian, his seasoned general Mark Antony, and the lesser-known Lepidus. The Roman world was divided, and the East, including Egypt, fell to Mark Antony's sphere of influence. And so, 4 years after Caesar's death, the queen was summoned to meet this new Roman master in the city of Tarsus. The cycle was beginning again. But Cleopatra was no longer a desperate girl in a carpet. She was a 30-year-old queen at the height of her power and cunning, and she would not arrive as a supplicant. She would arrive as a goddess. Her entrance into Tarsus was a piece of political theater so brilliant it has never been forgotten. She came on a magnificent barge with a golden stern and purple sails, its oars dipping in time to the music of flutes. She herself was reclined under a canopy of gold, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, attended by boys costumed as cupids and maidens as sea nymphs. The air was thick with the scent of her perfumes. She was not coming to plead her case, she was inviting Antony, a man often associated with the god Dionysus, to a divine revel. He was a man of immense appetites, for wine, for women, for glory, and she presented herself as the ultimate fulfillment of all three. He was utterly, completely captivated. He dined with her on her ship, a feast of legendary opulence. When he expressed awe at its magnificence, she laughed it off as nothing. The message was clear, her wealth and power were beyond his comprehension. He abandoned his duties and followed her back to Alexandria, where they spent a winter of extravagant indulgence, a society they called the inimitable livers. She was his perfect companion, matching him drink for drink, joke for joke, and hunt for hunt. She made herself not just his lover, but the very source of his delight. When political necessity forced Antony to return to Rome, he entered a political marriage with Octavian's sister, Octavia. But his heart and ambitions remained in the East. 4 years later he returned to Cleopatra, and their partnership was reborn, this time as an explicit political and military alliance. He needed Egypt's bottomless treasury for his grand campaign against the Parthian Empire. In return, in a series of spectacular ceremonies known as the Donations of Alexandria, he gave her and her children vast swathes of Roman territory in the East. He recognized her son Caesarion as Julius Caesar's true heir, a direct challenge to Octavian. To Rome, and especially to Octavian, this was the ultimate betrayal. Antony was no longer a Roman general. He was a traitor, enslaved by an Oriental sorceress queen. Octavian launched a propaganda war of unprecedented viciousness, painting Cleopatra as a monster of decadence and manipulation, a threat to the very fabric of Rome. The Senate was persuaded to declare war, not on Antony but on Cleopatra. The final confrontation came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. The details are complex, but the enduring image is one of tragedy and controversy. As the battle turned against them, Cleopatra's squadron of 60 ships suddenly hoisted their sails and broke through the fighting, heading for Egypt. Antony, seeing her flee, abandoned his own fleet and followed her. It was a catastrophic blow to his credibility. Had she panicked? Had they planned a breakout all along? We will never know for certain, but the result was the same. Their cause was lost. They returned to Alexandria to await the inevitable. The following year, Octavian's army closed in. One by one, Antony's allies deserted him. Then a false report reached him that Cleopatra was dead. In despair, he fell on his own sword. As he lay dying, he learned she was still alive, barricaded in her mausoleum. He was carried to her and hoisted up to a high window, dying in her arms. Now Cleopatra was alone, Octavian's prize prisoner. He wanted her alive, to be paraded in chains through the streets of Rome. For a queen who had lived as a goddess, this was an intolerable fate. She outmaneuvered him one last time. After paying final respects at Antony's tomb, she returned to her chamber, bathed, and ate a final meal. A peasant delivered a basket of figs. Hidden within was an asp, a small Egyptian cobra. She let the serpent bite her, choosing her own end with a calm finality. When the guards found her, she was dead on her golden couch, dressed in her royal robes, a queen to the very last breath. With her died the last pharaoh of Egypt. Her son Caesarion was hunted down and killed. Egypt became a province of Rome. Cleopatra's legacy is the woman herself. Not just the beauty but the brilliant mind, not just the lover but the strategist, not just the tragic figure but the queen who, for over 20 years, played the highest-stakes game of politics against the most powerful empire the world had ever known, and very nearly won. She was the last and greatest pharaoh of them all.